Hey everybody, welcome to another chapter of the Count of Monte Cristo. So we're at chapter 33, The Pair of Dappled Greys. Madame Danglars, whose beauty was quite remarkable in spite of her 36 years, was at the piano, a little masterpiece of inlay, while Lucien Debray was seated at a work table turning over the pages of an album. Before the Count's arrival, Lucien had had time to relate many particulars regarding him to Madame Danglars, and her curiosity, being aroused by the old stories related by Monte, was brought to its highest pitch by the details told her by Lucien. In consequence, she received the Baron with a smile, which was not her custom, while the Count received a ceremonious but at the same time graceful curtsy in acknowledgment of his bow. Baroness, permit me to present to you the Count of Monte Cristo, who has been most warmly recommended to me by my correspondents at Rome, said Danglars. I will only add one fact which will make him a favorite among the ladies. He intends staying in Paris for a year, and during that time he proposes spending 6 millions. That sounds promising for a series of balls, dinners, and supper parties, and I hope the Count will not forget us, as we shall not forget him in the small parties we give. Though the introduction was so vulgar in its flattery, it is such a rare event that a man comes to Paris to spend a princely fortune that Madame Danglars gave the Count a look which was not devoid of interest. You have come at a very bad season, said she. Paris is detestable in summer. There are no more balls, receptions, or parties. The Italian opera is at London. The French opera is everywhere except at Paris. There remain for our sole entertainment a third-rate race meeting or two on the Champ de Mars or at Satori. At this moment, Baroness Danglars' confidential maid entered, and approaching her mistress, whispered something into her ear. Madame Danglars turned pale. Impossible, said she. It is nevertheless the truth, madame, replied the maid. Madame turned to her husband. Is this true, monsieur, what my maid tells me? What has she told you, madame? Asked Danglars, visibly agitated. She tells me that when my coachman went to put my horses to the carriage, they were gone from the stables. What does this signify, may I ask? Madame, listen to me, said Danglars. I will certainly listen to you, for I am curious to know what you have to tell me. I will ask these gentlemen to be our judge. Messieurs, continued she, Danglars has 10 horses in his stable. 2 of those, the handsomest in Paris, belong to me. You know my double greys, Monsieur Debray. I have promised to lend Madame de Villefort my carriage to go to the Bois tomorrow, and now my horses are gone. I suppose Monsieur has found some means of making a few thousand francs on them and has sold them. What a money-grasping lot speculators are. Just then, Debray, who was looking out the window, suddenly exclaimed, By Jove, surely those are your very horses in the Count's carriage. My doubled greys, cried out Madame Danglars, rushing to the window. Yes! Those are mine indeed. Danglars was astounded. Is it possible, said Monte Cristo, affecting astonishment. It is incredible, said the banker. Danglars looked so pale and discomfited that the Count almost had pity on him. The banker foresaw a disastrous scene in the near future. The Baroness's frowning brow predicted a storm. Debray saw the gathering clouds and, on pretext of an appointment, took his leave, while Monte Cristo, not wishing to mar the advantages he hoped he had gained by staying any longer, bowed to Madame Danglars and withdrew, leaving the Baron to his wife's anger. All is well, thought Monte Cristo. I have achieved my object. The domestic peace of this family is now in my hands, and with one action I am going to win the gratitude of both the Baron and the Baroness. What a stroke of luck. But with all this, he added, I have not been introduced to Mademoiselle Eugénie, whose acquaintance I am very anxious to make. Never mind, he continued with that peculiar smile of his. I am in Paris with plenty of time before me. That can be left for a later date. With this reflection, he stepped into his carriage and returned to his house. 2 hours later, Madame Danglars received a charming letter from the Count of Monte Cristo, in which he wrote that he did not wish to make his entrance into Paris society by causing annoyance to a beautiful woman, and entreated her to take back her horses. The horses were sent back wearing the same harness as in the morning, but in the center of each rosette, which adorned the sides of their heads, there was a diamond. Danglars also received a letter. The Count asked his permission to satisfy a millionaire's whim and requested him to excuse the Eastern fashion adopted in returning the horses. In the evening, Monte Cristo went to his country house at Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. Toward 3 o'clock the next day, Ali, summoned by a stroke of the gong, entered the Count's study. "Ali, you have often spoken to me of your skill in throwing the lasso," said the Count. Ali drew himself up proudly and nodded assent. "Good. You could stop a bull with your lasso." Ali nodded assent. "A tiger?" Another nod. "A lion?" Ali pretended to throw the lasso and imitated the choked roar of a lion. "I understand," said Monte Cristo. "You have hunted lions." Ali nodded his head proudly. "But could you stop 2 runaway horses?" Ali smiled. "Well, then, listen," said Monte Cristo. "In a few minutes, a carriage will come along drawn by 2 runaway horses, the same dappled grays that I had yesterday. Even at the risk of being run over, you must stop these horses before my door." Ali went out into the street and traced a line on the pavement before the door. Then the Nubian seated himself on the stone that formed the angle of the house and the road and began smoking his chibouque, while Monte Cristo returned to his study. Toward 5 o'clock, however, when the Count expected the arrival of the carriage, he began to manifest distinct signs of impatience. He paced a room overlooking the road, he stopped at intervals to listen, and from time to time approached the window through which he could see Ali blowing out puffs of smoke with a regularity which indicated that he was quite absorbed in his important occupation. Suddenly, a distant rumbling was heard which drew near with lightning rapidity. When a carriage appeared, the coachman vainly striving to restrain the wild, infuriated horses who were bounding along at a mad speed. In the carriage, a young lady and a child of 7 or 8 years were lying in each other's embrace. Their terror had deprived them of all power to utter a sound. A stone under the wheel or any other impediment would have sufficed to upset the creaking carriage. It kept to the middle of the road, and the cries of the terrified spectators could be heard as it flew along. Suddenly, Ali laid down his chibouque, took the lasso from his pocket, and threw it. Catching the forelegs of the near horse in a triple coil, he suffered himself to be dragged along 3 or 4 yards, by which time the tightening of the lasso so hampered the horse that it fell onto the pole which it snapped, thus paralyzing the efforts the other horse made to pursue its mad course. The coachman took advantage of this short respite to jump down from his box, but Ali had already seized the nostrils of the other horse in his iron grip, and the animal, snorting with pain, sank down beside its companion. All this took no more time than it takes a bullet to hit its mark. It was, nevertheless, sufficient for a man, followed by several servants, to rush out from the house opposite which the accident had happened. As soon as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, he lifted out the lady, who was clinging to the cushion with one hand, while with the other she pressed to her bosom her fainting son. Monte Cristo carried them both into the salon, and placing them on a sofa, said, "You have nothing more to fear, madame, you are safe." The lady soon came round and pointed to her son with a look which was more eloquent than all entreaties. The child, indeed, was still unconscious. "I understand, madame," said the Count, examining the child, "but you need not be alarmed. The child has received no injury. It is only fear that has rendered him unconscious." "Are you only telling me this to still my anxiety? Look how pale he is, my son, my child, my Edward. Answer your mother. Oh, monsieur, send for a doctor. I will give my fortune to him who restores my son to me." Monte Cristo opened a casket and took out a flagon of Bohemian glass encrusted with gold, containing a red blood liquid, a single drop of which he placed on the child's lips. Though still pale, the child immediately opened his eyes. On seeing this, the mother was beside herself with joy. "Where am I?" she cried out, "and to whom do I owe such happiness after such a cruel trial?" "Madame, you are under the roof of a man who esteems himself most fortunate at having been able to spare you any pain," said Monte Cristo. "It is all the fault of my wretched inquisitiveness," said the lady. "All Paris talked of Madame Danglars' magnificent horses, and I was foolish enough to try to want to try them. Makes more sense. "Is it possible?" exclaimed the Count with admirably feigned surprise. "Do these horses belong to the Baroness?" "Yes, monsieur. Do you know her?" "I have that honor, and I feel a double joy at having been the means of saving you from the danger that threatened you, for you might have attributed the accident to me. I bought these horses from the Baron yesterday, but the Baroness appeared to regret their loss so deeply that I sent them back with the request that she would accept them from me." "Then you must be the Count of Monte Cristo of whom Hermine has spoke so much yesterday." "That is so, madame, and I, monsieur, am Madame Eloise de Villefort." The Count bowed as though he had heard a name completely unknown to him. "How grateful Monsieur de Villefort will be, continued Eloise. He owes both our lives to you, and you have restored to him his wife and his son. If you had not been for your brave servant, this dear child and myself would certainly have been killed. Alas, madame, I still shudder at the thought of your danger. I hope you will permit me to give your servant the just reward for his devotion. Madame, I beg of you not to spoil Ali either by praise or by reward, replied the Count. Ali is my slave. In saving your life he served me, and it is his duty to serve me. But he risked his life, said Madame de Villefort, who was strangely impressed by the Count's masterful tone. I saved his life, madame, consequently. It belongs to me, replied Monte Cristo. Madame de Villefort made no reply. Perhaps she was thinking about this man who made such a strong impression on everybody who set eyes on him. During this momentary silence, the Count had leisure to examine the child whom his mother was covering with kisses. He was small and slender. His skin was that of whiteness generally found with auburn-haired children, yet a mass of rebellious black hair covered his round forehead. It fell onto his shoulders, encircling his face and redoubling the vivacity of eyes which were so expressive of sly malice and childish naughtiness. His mouth was large, and his lips, which had scarcely regained their color, were thin. The features of this child of 8 were those of a boy of 12 or more. His first movement was to wriggle himself free of his mother's arms and to open the casket from which the Count had taken the phial of elixir. With the air of a child accustomed to satisfy his every whim, and without asking anyone's permission, he began to unstopper the phials. "Don't touch anything there, Sonny," said the Count sharply. "Some of those liquids are dangerous, not only to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort turned pale, and seizing her son's arm, drew him toward her. Her fierce calm she immediately cast on the casket a fleeting but expressive glance, which had not escaped the Count's notice. "Do you reside here?" Madame de Villefort inquired as she rose to take her leave. "No, madame," replied the Count. "This is only a little country house I have just bought. I reside at number 30 Champ d'Elysée, but I see that you have quite recovered and are desirous of returning home. I have just given orders for the same horses to be put to my carriage, and Ali will have the honor of driving you home while your coachman stays here to repair the damage." "I dare not go with the same horses," said Madame de Villefort. "Oh, you will see, madame, that in Ali's hands they will be as gentle as lambs," was Monte Cristo's reply. Indeed, Ali had already tackled the horses that had only with difficulty been set on their legs again. He held in his hand a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, with which he rubbed away the sweat and foam that covered their heads and nostrils. Almost immediately they began to breathe loudly and to tremble violently. This lasted several seconds. Then, in the midst of a large crowd which the news of the accident had gathered before the house, Ali harnessed the horses to the Count's brougham, took the reins, mounted the box, and to the utter astonishment of those spectators who had beheld these same horses bolting like a whirlwind, he was compelled to use his whip vigorously to make them move. Even then they went at such a slow trot that it took nearly 2 hours to reach the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, where Madame de Villefort lived. Anyone else suspect drugged horses? All right, getting close to the middle. Everyone have a good one.